Throughout time, people have searched for enlightenment, for something more than an ordinary life, or at most consider a successful life can provide. Beneath the veneer of everyday existence lies the secret of human destiny, promising something greater. A powerful procedure, encoded in sacred religious scriptures, hidden in myths, symbols, and art, has been practiced by the few who have known it throughout history to achieve an unimaginable transformation. To change from a human being into an immortal spiritual being, from a person into an angel. The foundation of this procedure is Gnosis, which means knowledge. Those who discovered and utilized this knowledge are the Gnostics, which means those who know. The knowledge sought after in Gnosticism has a purpose, spiritual change. But what is this knowledge or Gnosis that Gnostics seek and use?
Gnosis is spiritual knowledge.
A deep insight into ourselves, why we are here, where we are going, and what we can do with our lives.
Gnosis is a Greek word meaning knowledge, but it means a particular type of knowledge.
It's based on what you really experience.
Direct personal contact with the divine.
As opposed to a knowledge that we acquire through intellectual study or just theoretical beliefs.
We have to do spiritual practices. We have to do certain things in order to get these experiences.
You don't need an understanding of complex theories or ideas about how the universe works. It really comes from an experience that's gained through practical things.
This allows us to awaken. It allows us to reach enlightenment.
Hello, I'm Jenny, and welcome to the Introduction to Christian Gnosticism series, where we will explore Christian Gnosticism, its history, practices, and purpose. In this first part, we'll examine the question, what is Gnosticism? Gnosis itself, which is the knowledge that leads to spiritual awakening, doesn't have a historical beginning, since it has always existed, but it has emerged throughout human history in different forms. Anyone who has found and used this knowledge to transform themselves is a Gnostic in the true sense of the word, although different words or symbols may have been used to refer to it. The term Gnostic originates from the times of Jesus, who brought the Gnostic teachings to humanity and passed down in a hidden form the keys to the kingdom of heaven. It is from the teachings of Jesus and his disciples that Christian Gnosticism originates. Those who followed, who knew the true and deeper meaning to Jesus' life and teachings, were the ancient Christian Gnostics.
A Gnostic is anyone who attains self-knowledge. And there's been many people throughout history who have done that without necessarily being called a Gnostic. But historically speaking, the Gnostics, as they were known, emerged around the time of Christ and his disciples.
So the Gnostics are people that look for that spiritual, divine experience, the experience of what is true.
And this is what really distinguished the Gnostics from the general religious sort of public. The Gnostics were really mystics, people that were striving to experience things for themselves, to undergo an inner transformation.
There is a well-defined process for doing this, and this is the spiritual path.
The Christian Gnostics understood that Jesus' life has a symbolic meaning. It has a deeper meaning to it. His life symbolically illustrates the path to enlightenment, the path that everyone needs to walk if they want to awaken.
It's really a drama, a cosmic drama, Jesus' life, that has appeared in many different cultures throughout different ages and different places in the history of humanity.
But Jesus showed that path through his life, and Christian Gnostics understood that and used the teachings that he left behind in order to walk that path for themselves.
So the Christian Gnostic teachings really originate from the teachings of Jesus.
And from his 12 disciples who continue to teach and pass on what he taught. These teachings had two sides to them. There was the public side and there was the private, esoteric side, the hidden side, the side that the Gnostics were able to grasp.
Following Jesus' crucifixion, Christianity took on different forms. Some of the early Christians, the Gnostics, followed the deeper and more advanced side of Jesus' teachings, while others only saw and followed the simple and public side to his teachings. Paul of Tarsus, who proclaimed himself an apostle and taught a limited public form of Christianity, clashed with the disciples of Jesus based in Jerusalem, who were Gnostics.
Paul is known as an apostle today because he proclaimed himself an apostle, but he wasn't really an apostle of Jesus. He never actually met Jesus.
So Paul was initially persecuting the Christians, the early Christians. He then underwent an experience which the apostles were quite skeptical of. But in this experience, he then converted to Christianity.
His teachings were purely public. They lacked that esoteric side to them.
They were easy for people to understand. They were easy for people to accept.
The theology of Paul was more concerned with informing people how to behave, how to act. A lot of Paul's works actually comprise the New Testament. It's pretty close to 45% of the New Testament. In all of these writings of Paul, it's only once that he actually quotes anything directly said by Jesus.
Paul introduced elements to Christianity that just come from him. He introduced things that were not taught by Jesus.
Paul disagreed with the Church of Jerusalem, which was formed by the original disciples of Jesus on a number of different issues. And there's even cases from Paul's own writings where he directly confronts Peter.
Peter is the disciple whom Jesus called the rock that I found my church upon. But Paul undermined Peter. The Jerusalem church suffered a major setback when, following the Jewish rebellion, the Romans basically took the city and destroyed it.
And from this point on, the real teachings from the Church of Jerusalem went underground. But Paul's teachings continued to spread.
What most people would think of as Christianity emerged from that, from his version of the teachings.
The Roman conquest of Jerusalem left the city razed and the Jerusalem church's foundation destroyed. Paul's Christianity, with its followers based elsewhere, was left to flourish unhindered. There was no single unified church in the beginning, but over time a dominant strand emerged. With a campaign of censorship and persecution, along with the help and influence of Roman politicians, it would determine the course of Christianity, and which texts would make it into what became the Bible, and which teachings of Jesus would be rejected.
The letters of Paul and the later fathers of the church, the writings of Irenaeus, Origen, and Plotinus, who were really condemning the Gnostics and the Gnostic teachings, started to become used to influence the formation of the New Testament books.
Irenaeus and certain others were determined to unify Christianity, And in doing that, they basically started drafting what they believed in terms of Jesus and the role that he played in Christ and God and so on.
They had to decide what it was that would define Christianity. And because there was so many different views of what it was to be a Christian, there was basically this drive to have it clearly defined what was and what was not acceptable.
They denounced anyone who disagreed with them as heretical. A big turning point was in 367 AD, when the Bishop of Alexandria created the first New Testament canon, and he basically said which texts were in and which were out.
Because they weren't privy to that esoteric teaching, were unable to decipher a great deal of the Gnostic texts that they came in contact with.
The first Christian Roman Emperor, Constantine, had a huge impact on the development of Christianity. He legalized it, but with the Council of Nicaea, he also had an impact on defining what that religion would be.
Constantine then called all the bishops together and convened the Council of Nicaea.
All the bishops of the Christian faith basically came together to work out what it was that they all believed in, and was promoted by the Roman Emperor Constantine in order to have some kind of cohesion amongst the Christians.
And eventually this was voted upon, so it was literally a vote.
Under the Roman Emperor Constantine, Christianity became a legal religion in the empire. But it wasn't until Theodosius that Christianity actually became the official religion of the Roman Empire.
But he didn't favour all forms of Christianity, and there were many. Those who didn't conform to the conventional orthodox view of what Christianity should be were not given legal recognition, and in fact were banned from meeting.
Church and state became fully merged, and in doing that it's quite clear to see that it was really a way of controlling society, a political control.
With the Roman government behind them, the church gradually accepted and rejected certain texts, which led to the development of the New Testament that we have today.
The rest of the books that were written or available at the time became heretical, and a lot of them were buried and hidden.
We lost so many teachings of Jesus. Jesus' own teachings were considered heretical, the ones that didn't conform to their ideas of what the Christian religion should be. So many Gnostic texts were outlawed and lost. An example is the Nag Hammadi library. And besides the 4 Gospels, the only other main Gnostic text that made it into the Bible is the Book of Revelation.
Under the new government-backed Christian regime, the Gnostics were considered heretics and faced repression and persecution until they were effectively wiped out.
Really, until the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library and the Gnostic Gospels, the only thing that was known to us in the modern age about the Gnostics was what was written by those people persecuting them.
It's ironic that the church itself originally was heavily persecuted by the Roman Empire, and then eventually once the church gets enough power, it then becomes the persecutor.
The idea that any human being could walk any kind of spiritual path then became heretical. So the Gnostics were basically persecuted because they were teaching people that anyone can become a spiritual being.
But Gnosis did not end there. The knowledge was rediscovered and re-emerged throughout history, like an undercurrent through the ages. The teachings were concealed in legends and myths, such as the quest for the Holy Grail. Many of the later groups that emerged also faced persecution from the public, conventional form of Christianity.
Gnosis could never be stamped out completely, because it's something that is beyond a particular group. It's something that exists and is a part of life, and people who seek for it find it.
One of the groups that emerged after the early Christian years were the Knights Templar.
They emerged in the 12th century. Although initially respected, they lost favour with the church in the 14th century.
King Philip IV of France instigated the persecution of the Knights Templar as heretics.
Now, although these orders came from the king, They were issued under the authority of William of Paris, the Inquisitor of France.
They were basically charged with a number of different heresies, and under torture, confessions were forced from them.
Those who retracted those confessions after they had been tortured were burned at the stake.
The CATHARS emerged in the Middle Ages, and their name derived from an ancient Greek word meaning perfect or perfected ones.
They were widespread throughout France and popular in Europe, and they emerged in the 11th century. They posed a real threat to the church at that time because they were very popular, and those who were part of that movement, and they included peasants right up to lords, didn't answer to the church.
And eventually this became a bit of a thorn in the Pope's side.
So the church sent out missionaries to try and convert them. One of these was Saint Bernard, who said, "No sermons are more Christian than theirs, and their morals are pure."
Their message was much more practical and direct and could be seen directly lived.
When the church failed in its efforts to convert them, Pope Innocent III launched a crusade. He'd tried launching it before but couldn't rally the support until a papal legate was murdered in the lands of the Count of Toulouse in southern France.
And this was seen as then an opportunity for the Pope to basically call a crusade against the Cathars.
The Pope blamed the Count of Toulouse for orchestrating the legate's death and had also accused him of harbouring heretics in his lands. But the Count reconciled with the church and actually joined the crusade, which then attacked neighbouring lands with Cathar populations.
And resulted in mass extermination of not just Cathars but also innocent women and children and even Catholics in that region.
Many were displaced, and 1 million people are thought to have died.
The Inquisition continued to stamp out remaining heretics. Those who refused to confess were usually burned at the stake. Esoteric schools and mystery groups practiced secretly to avoid persecution.
The aim of the Inquisition was to weed out any heretics and any teachings that contradicted those of the Church. It lasted for some 700 years, beginning in the late 12th century and continuing into the 1800s.
The Church was forever trying to weed out heretical beliefs and heretical people and try to convert them, and if they couldn't do that, then they burned them.
Who knows how many people were killed, burnt at the stake, or tortured by really horrible, horrible methods. So in this period of time, those groups that found Gnosis and that were practicing the esoteric teachings had to hide themselves for obvious reasons.
Even though the Inquisition carried on, the esoteric teachings, the Gnostic teachings persisted, because there are always individuals that are seeking enlightenment. It's that yearning to reunite with the divine that pushes people to keep searching. So if they need to practice the esoteric teachings and go underground because society condemns it or persecutes them for it, people still find a way.
However, the numbers of people interested in them started to diminish quite significantly because it became quite risky business to become involved in any heretical group or anyone that was giving any teachings that a consequence of having could be torture or even death.
The teachings resurfaced again, in a hidden form, with the medieval alchemists.
They taught about transforming metals into gold, transforming lead into gold. But it was a metaphor, it was an allegory for something that they did internally, which was about the spiritual transformation of a person from the lead of the personality into the gold of the spirit.
And this process of encoding the esoteric teachings has happened time and time again. And it's happened in different languages, in different cultures and so on. So although sometimes we look at teachings from different areas, different countries and different times, they appear to be different. There's a common thread through all of them.
In the 19th and 20th centuries, Gnosis re-emerged with the discovery of many Gnostic texts, the Pistis Sophia, the Nag Hammadi Library, and much more recently, the Gospel of Judas. Around the same time the Gnostic texts were rediscovered, Gnosis emerged in a new form, easily understandable. With the changes in the modern world, Gnosis was ready to be given openly. In the 1950s, Samael Aun of Colombia began to teach Gnosis to the modern world completely afresh. Widely known as the founder of modern Gnosis, Samael Aun directly investigated the esoteric knowledge that had become hidden beyond reach. Like the Gnostics of old, he used mystical practices to comprehend and gain knowledge of the divine. Samael was followed by Rabbelu, who carried the teachings forward, and today by Beelzebub. Gnosis emerged time and time again because the very thing that defines it, personal experience with the divine, is always sought by the few throughout the ages.
Gnosis appeared at many different times throughout history in different cultures, with the medieval alchemists, and before that in the times of Jesus. But Gnosis has always been appearing at different times in different cultures.
Gnosis didn't die, even though there were many attempts to wipe it out, because you can't really kill it, because what it is it's that longing to be with divinity. And when people have that longing, they seek for knowledge, they seek for the truth.
It's not like you have a handover from sect to sect throughout the years. The Gnosis, the information itself, emerges from these groups as the people themselves begin to search.
Today, Gnostics use the same methods to gain authentic spiritual experience. It is possible to do the same spiritual work as the disciples of Jesus. For this, we need the information on how to do it. This is contained in the 4 Gospels, the Gnostic Gospels and text, and is clarified clearly in the works of modern Gnosticism. A range of texts are studied in modern Gnosticism, including the 4 Gospels and the Book of Revelation from the Bible, selected works in the Nag Hammadi Library, the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas, the Pistis Sophia, the Flight of the Feathered Serpent, selected works of Samael Aun, and the works of Beelzebub. In Gnosis, there are 3 key practices taught for acquiring spiritual knowledge: inner transformation with the mystical death, alchemy, and helping others spiritually. These are supplemented by exercise in out-of-body experiences, meditation, self-observation and awareness, and studying dreams. Salvation is at the heart of religious teachings. In Christian Gnosticism, salvation is something to seek and strive for, with the scriptures serving as a guide, like a map providing direction. To achieve salvation, one needs self-knowledge, inner change, as well as personal spiritual experience and contact with the divine. Salvation is the culmination of a gradual process of personal transformation attained by walking the spiritual path. Jesus showed people the way, the hidden path to salvation, with his life and with his death. Those who could understand how to follow him by walking the path could reach salvation. This is not a passive process, but something that takes effort and the application of spiritual practices to accomplish.
So we can use the same techniques that the early Gnostics used, the same techniques that Jesus taught today. And this is what current Gnostics are still doing.
The teachings of Gnosis are more accessible than ever for those who are interested in taking up this spiritual work.
Well, that's it for the first part of this series. I'll see you again in part 2, where we will explore what the many benefits are to practicing Christian Gnosticism and what we can gain from it. Until then, bye for now.